Hello, everybody. Welcome to Possibilities with Monique DeMeo. I'm very excited to have a very special guest with me today. Her name is Heather Maloney. Let me tell you a little bit about Heather. She is a fundraiser in higher education, an executive coach, and an amateur athlete and coach with Empire Dragons New York City, the first breast cancer dragon boat team in metropolitan New York. She is a 15-year breast cancer survivor. After college, Heather spent her early careers in New York's magazine photography publishing world and eventually moved into TV, working for the BBC for 10 years. She transitions from television to nonprofits, settling at Columbia University Irving Medical Center in 2004. She worked on the pediatric oncology floor, raising critical dollars for young children and their families. Since 2012, she's had the privilege of working at prestigious academic institutions, including Northwestern University and the University of Southern California, where she has helped raise millions of dollars for student aid, groundbreaking research, and academic programs. After 2 decades of living in New York City, she has been happily ensconced in Edgewater, New Jersey, so close to me, where she spends half of her time. The other half of her time is spent with her long term partner in historic Hingham, Massachusetts. Welcome, Heather. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you have so much to say, and what an interesting journey you've had. I'd love for you to share your breast cancer diagnosis and journey just to sort of set the stage for where you are today with the audience, because it's really fascinating.
It's so funny because about 2 weeks ago, I was in California for work and I was with a colleague who recently was diagnosed and had to go through treatment. And it's amazing how immediate the experience comes back. You hear 15 years and you feel like, oh, that's a while. But honestly, I can connect with it as if it happened last week. So it's interesting on some of these type of experiences that have, a lot of depth and trauma to them stay with you. But I was happily moving along in life and did not have any health issues. I was 44 years old, 43, 44. I think I just turned 44. I was down in Ocean Grove, New Jersey with two friends of mine and my mother, and we were, you know, horsing around and I fell onto something like to the side and I went, ow. It was like something right on my bra. And it was this really hard lump that I had never felt before. And my one friend, Jeanette, looked at me and said, you need to get that checked out. And I had very coincidentally had a mammogram the week before. So I said, well, I already did. So that was good. And I called the hospital. They were calling me at the same time. And they're like, yeah, there's something there. You need to come back. So I did. We went back. I got another mammogram, another sonogram. I do remember in the sonogram, and this is one thing for people to remember, if you have a feeling, you have to really honor it. Because I remember thinking I didn't like the woman who was doing the sonogram. I thought she was a little dismissive and a little distracted. Not like she was a bad person or anything, just like distracted because I had a lot of sonograms and I just remember them being all very like meticulous and they were really into it, but I just remember her not. And I didn't that sort of resonated with me, and that at the end of the day was where the problem lied. And so again, they said, yes, you have something. It needs to be aspirated. It's a lump, it's a cyst, but just has a lot of fluid. And then, in time, if it bothers you, just go to a surgeon and have it taken out. I said, all right, no problem, check. Life went on again. As I have mentioned, I had to you previously that I was about 3 months later, 2 months later in November, I got the original mammogram in September. I got out of the shower and I noticed a really, what was now a dramatic black and blue coloring around this lump. And I thought, all right, that's not good. Very quickly called my doctor, went to the surgeon. And in that room is those moments that sort of stick in your brain that never go away. In that room, and I sat down and he looked at me. He very quickly said, Ms. Maloney, we have an issue here. And he explained that I had two lumps and that the one that I had initially found in September was one that had not been registered on the sonogram. She had seen another lump. So there were two. And when he said that, I realized that I was in trouble because I knew enough. I worked on a cancer unit for children. Very quickly, he biopsied it, and it was cancer. And the moral of the story is whenever you have a lump and you go in to get it looked at, take your finger and point directly at it so that the person who's imaging it knows exactly where to go. Because basically what happened to me was who's on first. It was a mistake. And because I worked in the hospital, they did bring me back to look at the first film, and it was apparent that it was not seen. And that's sort of, it's just called life, right? So I went through what many of us go through. Everyone has a different treatment. I had a very aggressive treatment because my cancer was a little bit far along. It's called stage 2B, close to the third, which is not a good place to be. I was in my early 40s. So I did get hammered aggressively with a mastectomy, 6 months of chemo, and then I don't know, a long radiation process. It was pretty tough. And then I went on a clinical trial, and that was probably the hardest piece was on that clinical trial.
What did they do on the clinical trial?
I was on a drug that at the time they had high hopes for metastases called Avastin. And Avastin's been around for a long time. They were using children in clinical trials. And those were really for people who they were terminal, and they were trying to hope that Avastin would hold off the cancer. And they were testing in people like me the possibility that Avastin would thwart any kind of metastases. It was just a very, 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 very rough drug. And it was so interesting because I was on Avastin when little kids on the clinic floor that I was working on were on Avastin. So you really do have, a fascinating perspective around what people are dealing with. And I'll tell you, children are extraordinary. They are extraordinary because their coping mechanisms are probably better than ours as adults, because we get a lot of habits over time that might not necessarily serve us, whereas children are much more innocent and they have not lived long enough to get bad habits per se. And, I met some really interesting kids, and one of them said to me, "It's okay. It's not so bad," as he's walking to the radiation clinic, right? So
Oh,
it's sort of the wisdom of babes, they say sometimes, right?
I guess the children, they don't know what they don't know, so that's actually better, right? So they can approach it with this sort of openness and willingness to try that we may not, based on what you just said, our habits and our knowledge probably prevent us from being that open.
They're afraid, but they're much more, you're right, they're open, and there's a positivity to them that's super interesting.
That must have been really cool. I guess, where I believe there's no such thing as an accident, and we're supposed to be in the places that we're supposed to be, in the moments that we're supposed to be in it. I'll tell you a funny radiology story. I was at the radiologist this week, and some very interesting coincidence was happened for me. Who the radiologist was? She was from Spain, and guess where? From Madrid, where I just was. And it was like this, like out of all the radiologists I could have had, why that one? You know what I mean? Like it's just how people come in and out of your life, like how you came into my world. When we chatted, you said you had a moment of clarity, and I loved how you teed that up. And can you just tell the listeners what you meant by that moment of clarity?
There was a number of them. I think the first was the next day. I had three thoughts that were very distinct. The first one was that I was not going to hide. I was going to be open with what was happening to me, because I had also seen, working on the clinic floor, hiding really didn't seem to help people. You do take risks when you stay open, because sometimes people do say silly things to you, but that's part of being human. The next very important thing that I discovered in myself, which had always been an issue, was that I was going to receive. And these were very distinct thoughts. I was going to receive the help that I knew was going to come my way. I wasn't going to say no. I have been a person, and still struggle with, no first, yes second. That was a seminal moment for me to really sort of make a very distinct and how I was going to cope with this. And then the third piece was I was not going to die in my little apartment, though I love my apartment, but I was not going to die there. And I was going to move to this little village that I had found through a friend years earlier in Edgewater. But that seemed like a very impossible leap at that moment when I was sitting there in my living room the next day. But those were the three pieces of clarity that came to me. However, through the entire experience of the treatment, which lasted a solid year, there was a very distinct, and I know other people have experienced, I've seen books written on this, there was a very distinct presence of the now. For some reason, it felt like a veil, like lifted of sort of the noise between me and the world, right? So there's like maybe like a membrane or a membrane of noise that went away. And I was now so much in the world. It's hard to explain, but it's very, very distinct. It's a different way of living, and it was immediate, honestly.
You became very present. You became very present to life, to living, to being in that moment, in the moment.
In the moment. And, I started to do things very, very quickly. And I mean, I know some of these examples might sound a little, you know, small, but for instance, I went, so I had the surgery. I knew I was going to lose all my hair. I had not had the surgery and I knew I was going to lose my hair. And I looked at my mother, who was alive at the time and was really sort of my primary caretaker. And I looked at her, I was not married, and I said, "We're going to Danielle for dinner tonight." And she looked at me, she's like, "Danielle, the French restaurant for, whatever it was." I said, "We're going to Danielle tonight. I'm going to go get my hair cut and I'll see you later." So I went down with a friend and I got all my hair cut off. And I met my mother on Park Avenue and I put out my arm. I said, "Now let's go." So those kind of things were just, they happened faster and quicker. There was no hemming and hawing over money. Can I get arrested? It, it just kept on going like that. I was just much more succinct, much more deliberate, and I had less fear, which in a way doesn't make sense when you're facing treatment of this nature and this magnitude, but I seem to have a little less fear. That was the noise and the memory that went away.
Yeah, before I get to my next question, I'm going to add something because you just made me think of something. You Things serendipitously showed up for you. Like it almost became that your present, being present in the moment and being so much like with the membrane and the filter being gone. You talked about how things just happened. And so I want to segue onto how did you get to the Dragon Boat New York City experience and group and women, and how did that show up for you and align, and then what happened, all of that?
Well, as we know, everything happens through other people. I was a fairly terrorized by the possibility of one of the potential side effects of breast cancer surgery, which is called lymphedema. And lymphedema unhinged me in a way, or the possibility of getting it had unhinged me, and I was really in bad shape about it. I found a therapist. Her name was Stephanie, and Stephanie worked in lymphatic massage. So she would work with breast cancer patients. And the point is that if you have lymph nodes taken out of your body, which I did because I had cancer in my lymph nodes, that means that there's less lymph nodes to help move lymphatic fluid through your body, and it can get stuck. And it can get stuck in a permanent fashion and in a very painful fashion. So I was all about, I gotta get this, and I found her, and she very, she was. I felt bad for her because I had a lot of emotion when I was with her, and I hadn't even been diagnosed with lymphedema. And so she said to me, "Heather, I have another woman in this practice that I treat, and she just started a dragon boat team at Memorial Sloan Kettering, affiliated with it at the time, with this woman named Donna Wilson. Her name was Jennifer Marandino, and I think that you should think about it." And I just said, one of my famous line, "Dragon wedding."
Yeah, explain to the people listening to this what a dragon boat really is, because it's yeah.
So it's an Asia it's Asian originated in Asia and China, and it's a 40-foot boat. It has 20 paddlers on it on two sides, so 10 seats, 20 paddlers. A person in the front called the drummer, and then a person on the back called the steerer, and they race. And there's a whole world. It's a really big sport, primarily in Australia and China, parts of the United States, England, France. It's all over the world. Has gained some real popularity because it's something that a lot of people can do. Men and women, all ages, you can just jump on the boat and learn how to do it. And in the breast cancer world, a physician in Canada had deducted, he was a dragon boater, and he believed that the more that women who had had surgery or who were at risk for lymphedema, who are breast cancer survivors, the more they moved the body, the more they kept this whole area supple and the flowing of blood and lymphatic fluid, the more that they did that, the healthier they would be. And he felt that this sport was tailor made for them and started a revolution in the breast cancer community where now there are about 150 teams worldwide. I don't know the exact number of people that participate, but it's, in the thousands and thousands, probably, 25, 30,000 women, and is growing, and has become a very important corner of my life.
Tell us more about how that experience was, and now you're kind of leading some charges. I want you to express it to the listeners. It's pretty cool, I have to say.
Well, I went out a year later because I wasn't really well enough to do it. So about a year later, so I had treatment for a year. I guess maybe 6 months later, I went out to Flushing Bay, Queens, on the word on an email of this woman and the advice of a friend. So these are the kind of risks that perhaps maybe I wasn't necessarily so willing to take earlier in my life. So I went out there, and they put me on a boat. I got on the boat with all the other ladies, and it was a little like, but then I took a few. I was like, really? It was very low in the water. I was pretty nervous. Um, and I took a few strokes and thought to myself, I like this. I mean, it was pretty fast, and I liked it. And I thought, all right, I can do this. And this might not just be a bad thing for me because everyone on the boat's a breast cancer survivor. Donna or still is a physical trainer, and she's a 40-year-old, had been a nurse for 40, 50 years, and she was managing the team. And then from those moments became a whole world. We're a fairly large nonprofit now. We race all over the world. We're going to Italy in August. We've been champions of the East Coast. We ranked fifth in the world. We have a rigorous training program. I became a coach. I'm on the coaching staff. So it just sort of morphed from there. And just a lot of life lessons and also a beautiful community. I mean, it's a survivor community. It's for survivorship, which is something that isn't really, I think it's increasing as more people are getting cancer, surviving cancer, because those numbers are better than they used to be a long time ago, obviously. But it's a real place to go to not necessarily, no one really talks about cancer, but we support many of the members who have died, many of our members who've been re-diagnosed, many of them who have to go back into treatment. It is this loving community that understands, and it's what I would consider very healthy because it's based in getting your health and your vibrancy and the joy of life as your primary purpose versus, no, I wouldn't consider it any kind of victimhood at all. Like no one is done to the disease. Everyone is moving past it and with it and forward. And that's the culture that we have adopted.
First of all, I saw pictures of it and you showed me that video, and I just think that is just so empowering. You're so strong, you're so vibrant, you're moving, and it's in unison and it's so beautiful. It's like to me it's an elevated version of crewing and yeah, like that. It was just so empowering, which brings now you're not only a coach and you're on the training staff, you are front or back.
On the back, steerer.
You're the steerer. So let's be clear, people. For those of you who don't know this, and I didn't know this, so I'll be honest. one of my girlfriends was a coxswain, so it kind of relates to this. But the steerer is the one that calls the shots, okay? She's the badass on the back of the boat that's telling people what to do. Am I right or am I wrong?
That's correct.
So there she is, Miss, like, I'm not going, what am I doing here, to now she's like killing it. Which brings us to the next question, really, that I wanted to ask you is you made a comment when we first spoke about being afraid to be a badass, being afraid to be and having other people bring you into bravery. And I want you to unpack that a little bit because I find now where you are, where you sit, and who you are is interesting that you had that moment. So I think a lot of people that are listening to this can relate to that vulnerability.
Well, I was very happy being a paddler and really had no interest at all to elevate within the dragon boat team. I did not. However, apparently I had some skills or some qualities that worked for what the coaches at the time, James and Aquila were their names, what they were looking for a steerer. Because as we moved forward in competition, the rules of competition were becoming stricter, where the entire boat had to be breast cancer survivors. So for a while, they allowed the steerer to not be a breast cancer survivor and the drummer, but that was going away. So they had to elevate someone up to the steerer. And they brought me into a meeting and they sat me down and they said, "We'd like you to do this." And I said, "No." I said no for quite some time. It wasn't like I said no once and then capitulated. It was about 6 months, maybe even longer, of them just coming back to me and saying, "Listen, you really need to do this for the team. I mean, it's actually not about you. We're sorry. We actually need you to do this for the team because we have to choose someone and we've chosen you."
Now, do you know why they picked you out of the 19 other women?
I never asked. Only thing that they said was that I had the right qualities, and I didn't ask what those were. Perhaps if I'm honest with you right now and your listeners, I'm aware of those qualities. I just wasn't necessarily willing to allow them to come forth, which is the lesson of the boat, which every person on the team has, is that the qualities that you have that you might be shying away from will eventually be brought out of you. And the quality in me was leadership, which I was hesitant about, a little embarrassed about, ashamed, afraid to be upfront, afraid to be in that role itself, to inhabit that role itself. And this goes back a long way into early life of why perhaps we don't necessarily allow ourselves to evolve to where we need to go. So here was Heather Maloney's moment where I was being asked to and supported through and sort of bullied through a little bit to realize some potential. And I knew it was the right thing to do, even though I was very afraid. And I did it. And it was not easy for me, but I did it, and it became one of these spots where other things. It was the opening, right? So you don't know that you're going to have the opening because you don't want to be in the pain and you don't want to be uncomfortable, but you don't realize that the opening is right over that pain. If you can just get over it to the other side, that's what you're looking for. Like that's what all the books talk about, like all the speeches talk about and the gurus talk about. They're like, you got to get over that to get the good stuff. And it's an act of faith. And it's an act of, I need people to help me get there. I mean, I've learned that about myself, and that has continued to be the case. And then what happened was it opened up. It opened up my heart. It opened up my abilities. It created a steeliness in me that I hadn't had before, a confidence, I can handle this big wave coming at me right now with 30 people, with 20 people freaking out, right? I can handle it. I mean, we had a lot, on that dragon boat, it's not always pretty, right? It's a lot of choppy, scary conditions, and it can't overturn. Yeah, I can't dump. Yeah, I can't go over. And we've had moments where I was like, oh, here it is. It's finally going to happen. So I'm in charge of lives. So it just all those lessons of all that stuff over all these years came to me, and I was able to have it. And then one other thing someone said was my voice. So, I'm fairly soft spoken, but when I'm on the dragon boat, I step onto it and there's a whole nother person that comes out. And I think like actors talk about this kind of stuff, that something happens to them when they step onto this. That's exactly what happens to me. I'm not so necessarily aware of it. It doesn't really bother me either way. When I come off the boat, it goes away. When it goes on, it comes on. So it's very interesting, very natural.
So now you've been a steerer for how many years now?
I don't know, maybe 7.
Okay. So if I
Yeah.
may encapsulate what I'm hearing is now you're a badass and you're not afraid to say it.
Yes, yes.
So it's true. It's when there's no growth in comfort.
No.
So you have to be uncomfortable. It's sort of like me being a podcaster or me writing a book or me doing, sharing my stories from my childhood, which were not necessarily pleasant, or whatever. But it has the catharsis, the growth, the overcoming, the what was. You have to go through either pain or discomfort or both in order to get to the other side, to your point. So you had this hesitancy when you sent me that video, and there's a beautiful video of you. I mean, in case you people can't see Heather, she is gorgeous, by the way. So physically gorgeous. So inside and out. So here is this beautiful blonde human, but she's like delicate and very feminine, whatever. And she's like a badass on the boat. And she was interviewed and she used the word badass and she kind of did you didn't really sit with it. You were like, I don't know that badass word. And I called you a badass and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe you called me a badass. So what is it that the Heather of today versus the Heather of yesterday, are you now comfortable saying I'm a badass?
Yes.
Ah, come on, girlfriend.
Here it is. I feel comfortable on the back of the boat saying that. Yes, I do. It's still changing within the landscape of the rest of my life. Right? Because it's an ongoing process. I learned so much on the back of that boat, right? I really have and continue to, and actually am now sharing it with other people. We're training other people because I believe there are other women on my team that deserve the shot that I had to have the action, that metamorphosis, right? So we're training a number of women to do that. And they don't understand what they're going to get, right? They think they're just going to learn how to steer that boat. But there's a lot more that's offered to them that I've experienced. And in the rest of the landscape of my life, it is happening that the habits that experience brought to me are now coming in relationships, in the office, in other opportunities that I want to explore in my life. So yes, I'm good with it on the back of the boat, and I'm learning to be better with it in the rest of my life.
So I'm gonna start to wrap up. My second to last question is, what would you tell your 30-year-old Heather self if you were able to talk to her right now? What would you say to her?
It's so interesting you just asked that question because last night I went and saw the psychologist Esther Perel. Are you familiar with her work?
I don't know her well, but I know of her, yes.
So I was at she did a talk in New York City, and she asked the same question. I was with a good friend of mine, and I said, "What I would tell myself is that I love you, and to not worry. It's all going to be okay." Um, Gentleness is what I would tell my 30-year-old self.
I would tell her to
Yeah.
chill the F out.
Yeah. Well, that was the first thing that came to me. There were a lot of interesting things that people said from the audience that were all very, very meaningful. I mean, I guess we could tell ourselves a lot of things in retrospect at our 30-year-old self, but you can only be what you are at the time it's happening. Like I couldn't be who I am now at 30. It wasn't possible. A lot of things had to transpire to basically push me forward.
You said something to me that really stuck with me. You said you don't need to be all together in order to start. You need to start. I wanted you to elaborate on that.
I don't know this for sure, but I I think that many of us try to be as perfect as we can before we even try to change, like read all the books and and try to have it be set and have it organized before we start to try to change. And I have not, I don't believe that that works for me. It is an uncomfortable experience. It's one that most of us will try to avoid unconsciously, try to avoid. It's messy, it hurts, it's frightening, but yet it is the actual place that you have to get yourself to. And how you get yourself there is up to you. I mean, some people use therapeutic modalities, some people use certain types of people that they follow. But I mean, I learned it from a book called The Untethered Soul. In the book, The Untethered Soul, the author goes right through the process of how you get yourself to that state of being aware enough to allow the change to actually happen through you, which is being uncomfortable, withstanding it, let it pass through and get to the other side. And that's in the simplest of places. It can be in conversations with your boss. It could be in conversations with your partner where you're like, you know, it's not such a big deal. I'm not going to bring it up. That's where things have to change. You have to bring these things up. You have to go through the uncomfortableness of beginning to change the dynamics of whatever you need to change, right? So it's hard. Just got to start.
You just got to start. I had a coach teach us that the unsaid will rule your life, which is super powerful if you really think about it, which is exactly what you're saying. And from this Untethered Soul book, which I will put in the show notes as well. It's very interesting. So the authentic and the difficult conversations, we call them crucial conversations. There's a good book that I read called Crucial Conversations, and that's part of it. It's bringing forth what is holding you back in with others and with self. And what you described earlier about women not starting until they feel that they have it together is what I'm hearing over and over again with my guests. And recently I had Sarah Ricka on, and she is a wealth advisor. And she says that the reason that women don't come to her a lot, even when they have the money, and back to a conversation about money, is that they don't feel that they are grounded in the knowledge base that they should, in quotes, should have prior to going to a wealth management or a, financial planner. And the point of a financial planner is to help you do what it is that you don't have the skills to do. But we as women feel the need to have knowledge pre hiring this professional. You don't do it for, other things. Why do you feel this need to do that with money? So it is a consistent theme that I'm hearing with my guests and my friends, that we feel the need to master something before we go out and seek the help for it, which is the antithesis of why you hire somebody to help you with it. So wrapping up, what is it that you want to leave people with? My listeners are, of all age groups, and we're all kind of in the same boat. Pardon the pun. The proverbial boat, not the real dragon boat, though it is now fascinating. I might have to come check out a race. Tell us what you want to leave women with that are listening, and a few of men, actually, supporters.
Well, I mean, I would just encourage people to understand that where you are right now is where you're supposed to be. I wouldn't. I think we're oftentimes too hard on ourselves, and it doesn't matter what you've done or how far you have to go. It just matters if you start in an authentic way, right? And I would encourage people to read The Untethered Soul. It's a book that can change your life. It has changed my life. And I was given that book about 10 years ago, and I read it sort of daily. And I would just encourage people to keep on keeping on. And there's like a million ways to go about this, and keep on trying to find the way that works for you. I mean, I also was on that path in my life before I had cancer. I was always being an explorer and searching for how was I going to, grow? How was I going to improve? And I went through many, many things. And that's what you just have to keep doing. You have to keep going through many, many things, and know that at one point, what works for you, you will find. And it's different for every person. It really is. But there is similarities through what we all go through. We all come to the same conclusion in many ways. We might get there different ways, but we all come to the same conclusion around personal growth requires a level of uncomfortability. And in getting to that spot where you know how to get there is the work that we all have to do individually.
Well said. Thank you so much, Heather Maloney. I can't thank you enough. It was a masterclass in life and lessons. And thank you, God, that you are here with us today, 15 years later. What a beautiful gift that we have. So thank you. Thank you, listeners. Keep creating those possibilities. Make it a great day. Bye. Love and kisses. Thank you so much for listening to Possibilities with Monique DeMeo, where we unpack life as a female mover and shaker. If you like the show, please consider liking it, or better still, subscribing to it and leaving us a rating. It truly does help. Also, you can pick up my book, The 7 Secrets to Creating a Life You Love, a practical guide for women in leadership. You can find the book, other episodes of this podcast, and how to stay in touch at MoniqueDeMeo.com. DEMAIO. I look forward to seeing you again soon. With gratitude, Monique.